I'm Jake Dobkin. I'm the founder of Streetsy. It's a street art website, and my day job is the publisher of Gothamist, which is a website about New York City. I just got into graffiti when I was younger. I grew up in New York, and it's like a very New York thing to do when you're like a teenager, do graffiti. That was during like the early 90s, and there was sort of a mini renaissance of like traditional New York graffiti that started, you know, with Revs and Cost and JA, and there's just a lot of graffiti. It all goes back to when they started to clean up the subways in the late 80s, and that kind of pushed the graffiti out onto the streets. And, you know, around that time, like I got to high school, and, you know, we didn't have much parental supervision, so at night we'd go out in Chelsea or in the Village and, you know, do our tagging. And then when I got to college, I spent like some time abroad in Europe, and I saw street art for the first time. There had been some street art in New York previously, going back to the 70s and the 80s, Basquiat, you know, and Keith Haring and stuff, you know, non-traditional graffiti, but nothing like what I saw in Paris, like in the mid to late 90s. There was just like stencils and poster work and sculpture and just all sorts of like weird stuff that doesn't look like, you know, New York traditional lettering. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. You know, I came back, I was in college, I did some street art, like really, in retrospect, like I always say the first like street art people do is like always pictures of celebrities. Like everyone has to go through that phase where they do like John Lennon, Bob Marley. I was really pretentious. I did like, you know, Jean-Paul Sartre heads and Hemingway. And then I got tired of that because I realized I wasn't that good at it, and I started taking pictures of graffiti. More as like a documentarian. There's a community of people who like street art. I mean, you know, obviously there are the artists who like it and make it, and then there are the people who like to look at it. Then there are people like me who document it. There are gallerists who, you know, take street artists and put them into galleries. There are collectors. And, you know, without the internet, none of these people would have ever met. And so we kind of all interact online. And Streetsy is like one of those places. We're connected with Wooster Collective, which is another site that I've gotten to do some work on. And on Streetsy, like I sort of try to experiment a little bit more with the street art community. I'm very interested in the documentation of street art because it's very ephemeral. You know, if nobody took pictures of it, most street art would never get seen. And in like a city like New York, there are like 10 or 20 people who love to take pictures of it. It's kind of like a subculture of, you know, who can take the picture of it first. But in other cities, like when I'm out in LA, there's only just a couple of people who take pictures of it out there. And, you know, so a lot of pieces in LA just don't get seen. I've put up 10,000 pictures and tagged them and talked to all these artists, you know, who saw their work because I tagged their name on it. And, you know, that's just not something that could have existed before. Good artists, you know, can become famous in like, you know, a month. You know, they put up one piece and it blows up on the internet, like Vils, you know, he's that artist from Portugal who does like the cracked plaster portraits. Like, you know, he's probably like 20 years old. He blew up in like less than a year from like, you know, nowhere to like, you know, having shows at like Lazaridis Gallery or, you know, wherever in London. That's not something that could have happened before. I mean, even, you know, Basquiat took a few years to, you know, go from the streets to the galleries. I think another thing is that like there's a real internationalization of street art. You know, there used to be like, you know, a Los Angeles style of script. You know, you see it like Retina still does that. It's kind of like a Mexican script. You know, there used to be a Sao Paulo style of Pixadores, you know, a very Brazilian style script, a New York style. Now there's just like there's like two styles. There's like New York traditional graffiti that's done all over the world, and there's like international street art style, which is done all over the world. And, you know, I think like that's something that we've lost. It's nice when there's like some regionalism. I hope that that comes back at some point. Like commerce infects everything, money infects everything. You know, I would prefer graffiti and street art to just not be connected with money at all, that it would just be people posting for love and to make something beautiful. But obviously, that's not the way the world works. You know, artists want to make money just like anybody else, and I don't begrudge an artist making money. You know, you got to earn your living. So if an artist can get a gallery show and sell pieces, you know, good for them. That's probably, you know, better that they should be making that work than working in a grocery store or, you know, in a law firm. at the same time, it does create a lot of negative effects, you know, like you got the Banksy effect where people rip Banksy pieces off the wall, which sucks. I mean, because then nobody can see them. You know, you get a lot of artists who sort of, instead of spending time on the streets developing a style, kind of just put up a few pieces to get a gallery show. You know, they're not like true street artists. They're just doing it for the, you know, as like an entrance into that world of street art gallery stuff. A great piece of street art in a gallery often feels like denatured somehow. You know, you see like a swoon like out on the streets in the middle of nowhere in Brooklyn, and you're like, whoa, that's crazy. That's like an amazing piece. But you see that same swoon, you know, at Deitch projects or whatever, or on the wall of a gallery, it just, you know, loses something. And so me personally, like when I go to museums and galleries, I think I probably prefer to see work that was made for that context because it's appropriate. It's a very rare street artist. Like I can only think of a few, like maybe Dan Witts, who, you know, also do really great gallery work, you know, and great street work. It's mostly like you do one or the other. There's something really to be said for, you know, staying amateur, you know, staying and, you know, having another job, making your money some other way, and keeping your art as a place where you don't compromise like your values. You know, you just really do what you do. Because if you do it the other way, you know, you make art for somebody else, like you can tell the art suffers. It's not as good. I mean, Banksy is just a really good artist. There aren't that many artists who like are good, you know, illustrators, good painters, can also like edit a movie that like to make a good movie. It's impressive. I mean, I can understand why people dislike the extent to which he's become wealthy and dislike the, you know, miasma of celebrity that surrounds him. But I don't think anyone can deny that he's a good artist. I mean, he's clearly a good artist. I expected Banksy to start putting up pieces, and you know, sure enough, 2 weeks before the Oscars, they started to appear. That's part of the whole Banksy thing, you know, this idea of being famous and what it is to be famous. It's kind of interesting. I mean, Banksy's the only artist I can think of that, like, when he puts up a piece, dozens and dozens of people like run to take a picture of it. It's interesting, in LA, everyone runs to take a picture of it. In New York, everybody runs to like destroy it, you know? So like in LA, the pieces will last a few weeks. Like I'm going to LA 2 weeks from now, I wouldn't be surprised if some of those pieces are still up. In New York, they're gone 6 hours later. You know, like every graffiti artist in New York is like, open season on Banksy. You know, and that sort of tells you something. It's the difference between the two cities. There's been a broadening of mediums. You know, street artists are working in a lot more mediums. It used to just be posters, pretty much exclusively, maybe a little bit of sticker work, but you know, then it was stencils, now sculptural work. You know, I think the big thing when people think of the, you know, the future of street art, they always think of, you know, lasers. And there is some of that, like Graffiti Research Lab, you know, obviously has done a lot of cool projection stuff. You know, and I think that that is part of it. Although I think that permanence is also important, right? And one thing I don't like about laser work and projection is that it disappears when you pull out the plug. I think like a better corollary of like digital art might be something like, you know, computer hacking, right? Like where, you know, it almost has like the same destructive, like anti-establishment feel of like good graffiti, and there is something permanent about it because you do it and then it spreads, you know, and sort of stays in the system. You know, so I mean, I think like if we're going to talk about the future, we have to talk about broadening the idea of like street art to include other forms of, you know, protest. I don't know, WikiLeaks, would you consider them like a graffiti artist? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, there's something very like graffiti, like it feels like graffiti to me, even though obviously it's not.